There is a thought in your head right now that you didn't choose. It feels like yours. It sounds like you. It carries your voice, your logic, your memories. But if you slow down, just for a moment, you might notice something unsettling. You don't know where it came from. You never do. You wake up, you scroll, you react. You form opinions, make decisions, feel emotions that seem spontaneous, natural, inevitable. But what if none of it started with you? What if every belief you defend, every desire you chase, every fear that keeps you small was planted, not by one person, not by one moment, but by a system so vast, so subtle, that you've never even thought to question it because it doesn't control you the way you expect. It doesn't give orders. It doesn't force obedience. It whispers. It suggests. It shapes the way you see the world until you mistake its voice for your own. And the most dangerous part? You defend it. You protect it. You call it your identity. But cracks are already forming. You felt it before. That quiet discomfort when something doesn't add up. That strange awareness that you're moving, deciding, reacting, but not really choosing. Like you're walking a path that was drawn long before you arrived. This book is not here to comfort you. It's here to confront you. Because once you see the system, once you recognize the patterns, once you realize how deep it goes, you won't be able to unsee it. And the question that will haunt you is no longer, am I in control? But something far more dangerous. If you're not, then who is? Chapter 1, The Illusion of Choice. You made a decision this morning. You're certain of it. Maybe it was what to wear, what to eat, whether to check your phone before your feet touch the floor or after. Small things, harmless things. The kind of choices that feel so automatic, you barely register them as choices at all. And that's exactly the problem. Because here's what no one tells you. The moment a decision feels like yours, it has already been made. You're just catching up to the conclusion. Sit with that for a second. Not as a metaphor, not as philosophy. As fact, the version of you that believes it is freely choosing, the one reading these words right now, feeling vaguely resistant, maybe a little defensive, that version was assembled carefully, over decades, by forces you never consented to, never examined, never even noticed. Your preferences are inherited. Your instincts are trained. The voice in your head that says, I want this, or I don't want that. That voice has a history longer than your memory, and it was written before you were old enough to question a single word of it. You are not the author of your choices. You are the narrator reading them aloud. Think about the last time you made what felt like a truly spontaneous decision. A sudden craving, an impulsive purchase. A moment where you acted on gut feeling and told yourself afterward, that was just me, being me. Now think harder. What had you seen in the hours before? What emotion were you carrying? What need was quietly unsatisfied, sitting in the background like a low hum you'd learned to ignore? Every impulse has a root. Every craving has a cause. The feeling of spontaneity is not evidence of freedom. It's evidence of how deep the programming runs. This is not comfortable to hear. It's not supposed to be. Because the belief that you are free, genuinely fundamentally free to choose, is not just an idea you hold. It is the architecture of your entire identity. It is the story that makes everything else make sense. If you chose your career, you earned your life. If you chose your relationships, you are responsible for your happiness. If you chose your values, you are the author of your character. Remove the choice and what remains? A person shaped entirely by circumstance. A system executing its code. A river that believes it chose its own banks. That thought should disturb you. If it doesn't, you're not taking it seriously enough. Here is where it gets darker. You don't just make predictable choices, you make defensible ones. There's a difference, and it matters enormously. When your decisions are predictable, it means a pattern is running. When they are defensible, it means your mind has already constructed the story that makes the pattern feel like wisdom. You don't choose, then justify. The justification and the choice arrive together, dressed as one thing, indistinguishable even to you. The research is staggering and brutal in its implications. People who suffer damage to the emotional centers of their brains cannot make decisions, not because they lack logic, They have logic in abundance. But because decision-making is not rational, it is emotional, and the emotions were installed long before the logic arrived to explain them. What you call reasoning is, in most cases, rationalizing. The conclusion came first. The argument was built around it afterward. You already knew what you wanted. You just needed to make it sound like you thought about it. This isn't a flaw in broken people. This is the baseline function of the human mind, yours included. You felt this, even if you never named it. That strange sensation when an argument doesn't change your mind. But it should. When you encounter a fact that contradicts your worldview, and instead of updating the worldview, you find a reason the fact doesn't apply. When someone you dislike says something true, and it still sounds wrong coming from them. When someone you love says something false, and it sounds almost reasonable, you know this feeling. It is the system protecting its own conclusions. Logic doesn't drive the car. It sits in the passenger seat, narrating the route, pretending it chose the destination. The deeper you go, the stranger it gets, your sense of self. That persistent, continuous feeling that there is a you that persists through time, making decisions, learning, growing, is itself a constructed narrative. The brain does not experience reality in real time. It experiences a slightly delayed, heavily edited version of events, stitched together to create the feeling of a seamless, unified consciousness. The you that feels present and in control is actually a story your brain tells about events that have already neurologically occurred. Studies on voluntary movement show the brain initiates action before the conscious mind registers the intention to act. You experience the decision after it has already begun. Read that again. You experience the decision after it has already begun. You are not the pilot. You are the flight recorder. And yet, here is where the strangeness deepens. You feel like the pilot. Completely. Absolutely. With total conviction. The illusion is not partial or flickering. It is seamless and total, running at the highest possible resolution with no visible seams. That's what makes it so difficult to dismantle. You can't dismantle something you can't see the edges of. And the edges of this particular illusion are everywhere. In every preference, every opinion, every habit. You've named a personality trait because it's been with you so long. It started to feel constitutional. You think you like certain music because of who you are, but you like it because of when you heard it, who you were with, what you were feeling, what your nervous system was doing in that specific moment, and how many times the pattern was reinforced afterward. You think your politics are your own conclusions. They are the predictable output of your geography, your family, your economic position, and the particular information ecosystem that held your attention during your most formative years. You think your fear responses are instincts. They are lessons, learned without your awareness, encoded without your consent, executing without your permission. The self you trust the most, the gut, the instinct, the deep knowing, is the part of you most thoroughly shaped by everything that happened before you were old enough to choose anything. What does it mean, then, to decide? Not as a philosophical question, as a lived one, as the question you carry into every ordinary moment of your existence. The morning alarm, the food, the words you say and don't say, the risks you take and the ones you don't. If the decider was built by forces outside your control, and the decisions follow patterns you cannot fully see, then what exactly is the self that feels so certain it is steering? Maybe the answer isn't comforting. Maybe it isn't supposed to be. Because before you can understand what freedom actually is, if it exists at all, you first have to see clearly and without flinching what you mistook for it. You are not starting at the beginning of this story. You are waking up somewhere in the middle, having missed everything that built the room you're standing in. The walls were already there. The doors were already decided. And somewhere deep in the machinery of you, a pattern is already forming its next move. You'll feel it arrive as a choice. Chapter 2. The Script You Never Read. Before you had a single opinion, the opinion had you. Before you understood what the world was, the world had already decided what you would think of it. There was no blank page. There was never a blank page. By the time you were old enough to form a sentence, to point at something and say, I want that or I don't like this, the framework for all wanting and all disliking had already been constructed around you, inside you, so completely that it never occurred to you to ask where it came from. You have been reading from a script your entire life. The terrifying part is not that the script exists. The terrifying part is that you have never once seen it. You thought those were your words. They weren't. Think about what you consider normal, not abstractly, specifically. The rhythm of a week, what rest looks like, what ambition looks like, what a good life is supposed to feel like. Think about what you find attractive, what you find repulsive, what makes you feel proud and what makes you feel ashamed. These are intimate things. They feel like the most personal inventory a human being can carry. And yet, every single one of them was delivered to you before you were capable of evaluating whether you wanted it. A child does not choose their language, and yet the language shapes every thought they will ever think, because you cannot think beyond the boundaries of the words you have. A child does not choose their religion, their country, their class, their family's particular flavor of fear, and yet all of these things become the lens through which everything else is seen. And the terrifying property of a lens is that you do not see it. You see through it, completely. Without awareness, the lens doesn't announce itself. It simply becomes the shape of your vision, and you mistake it for reality. You've been looking through a lens your entire life. You just thought it was your eyes. Here is the part that will feel personal, because it is. There is something you believe about yourself, something you would describe as a core value, a deep commitment, a fundamental truth about who you are. Maybe it is how you feel about success. Maybe it is what you believe a man or a woman should be. Maybe it is your relationship with money, with control, with the bodies you were taught to trust or fear. Whatever it is, hold it in your mind for a moment. Feel how solid it seems, how obviously true, how obviously you. Now ask the question you have probably never asked. Where did this come from? Not rhetorically, literally. Follow the thread backward. Before you believed this, what did you see? Who modeled it? What was rewarded in the environment where you were what was punished, quietly or loudly, in ways you may not even remember consciously, but that your nervous system certainly does, because beliefs are not arrived at through reason. Not primarily. Beliefs are absorbed. They are caught the way children catch the emotional tone of a room before they understand a single word being spoken. And once caught, once encoded into the deep architecture of the self, they become invisible. Not because they hide, but because they become you, and you cannot see yourself from the outside. The script wasn't handed to you. It was written into you, line by line, year by year, scene by scene. And then there is the culture, vast, ambient, relentless. If the family is the first theater in which the script is rehearsed, then culture is the stadium. It surrounds everything. It speaks in every film you've absorbed, every song that moved through you at 17, when your brain was most plastic and most hungry. Every advertisement that presented a version of desire and made it look like yours. Every story that showed you what a hero does, what a failure looks like, what a body should be, what love is supposed to feel like when it's real. Culture does not ask for your participation. It does not need your consent. It simply repeats, and repetition is the mechanism of belief. Say anything enough times, in enough different voices, through enough different channels, and it stops being a message. It becomes a fact. It becomes the texture of reality itself. You absorbed thousands of these facts before you turned 20. You are still absorbing them now. There is a particular kind of discomfort that arrives when you begin to trace your desires backward. When you realize that the thing you want, the body shape, the status signal, the particular vision of love or home or purpose, carries the fingerprints of 100 forces that had nothing to do with you. The discomfort is not just intellectual, it is existential. Because desire feels like the most intimate thing a person can have, the thing that is most undeniably mine, and yet desire is one of the most sculpted things about us. It is shaped by scarcity and abundance, by what was praised and what was mocked, by the specific images that accompanied pleasure during your most formative moments, by the stories that were told about what kind of person gets what kind of life. Your hunger was engineered, not by a conspiracy, not by a villain, by something far more ordinary and therefore far more inescapable, by the accumulated weight of everything that surrounded you, long before you could resist it. The script has genre conventions, and once you know them, you can see them everywhere. There is the story of the self-made individual, the one who rises through pure will, untouched by circumstance, owing nothing to the systems that carried or crushed them. Entire cultures worship this story, and people build their identities inside it, straining toward a version of themselves that was supposedly chosen from scratch, as if they emerged from nothing, as if the soil they grew in left no trace. There is the story of the romantic, the one who finds the other half that makes them whole, because that story was told so many times in so many forms that loneliness eventually came to feel like incompleteness rather than a passing weather pattern. There is the story of success, its particular shape, its particular rewards, the things that are supposed to fill the feeling of not enough that the same culture that sold you success was also busy generating in you from the beginning. The script creates the wound, then it sells you the bandage, and you keep buying it. Not because you are foolish, but because you have never seen the transaction from the outside. You cannot unhear a language you grew up speaking. You cannot unsee the world through a lens that has been your only vision since before memory. But something else is possible. Something harder and stranger and more disorienting than simply learning a new idea. It is the moment when you begin to notice the script, not as a revelation, but as a sensation. The faint wrongness of a reaction that arrives too quickly. The suspicion that an opinion you hold very strongly is held strongly, precisely because you are not allowed to question it. The quiet unease when something that should feel like yours, a goal, a fear, a standard you hold yourself to, begins to feel like a costume rather than a skin. That feeling is not a malfunction. It is the first honest thing. Most people, when they arrive at that sensation, move away from it quickly, back toward the certainty of the script, back into the well-worn grooves of inherited belief, because the alternative, the real alternative, is not just uncomfortable. It is vertiginous. It means standing in a room you have lived in your whole life and realizing that you did not build it, that the furniture was already there, that the doors lead where they have always led, and you have been calling the path your own. You were handed a life and told it was a choice. And here is the deepest cut. Somewhere in the script, there is a chapter about people who question the script. And in that chapter, they are warned, called dangerous, called ungrateful or unstable or lost. The system that writes you also writes the safeguard against rewriting. It predicted this moment, it planned for it. The question is, what you do with the half-second between the script running and you noticing that it ran, that infinitesimal gap where something that might be called you exists before the pattern closes over it again. That gap is smaller than you think, but it is there. Chapter 3. The Comfort of Not Knowing. You have been avoiding something your entire life, and the most disturbing part is how good it has felt, not avoiding it through effort, not through conscious resistance or deliberate distraction. Avoiding it the way lungs avoid thinking about breathing, automatically, effortlessly, as if the avoidance itself were just the natural texture of being alive. There are things you have never questioned, not because the questions are too difficult, but because somewhere, deep in the architecture of how you were built, the questions were made to feel unnecessary, dangerous even, like pulling a loose thread on a garment and discovering the entire thing was held together by that single strand. You stopped before you started every time, and you called it peace. There is a particular flavor of contentment that belongs to the unexamined life. It is warm, it is familiar, it asks nothing of you. You know the feeling, the easy satisfaction of a day that goes as expected, of opinions held without friction, of a sense of self that never contradicts itself because it has never been seriously tested. That feeling is real. It is not fake comfort. It is not shallow pleasure. It is a genuine neurological reward, delivered by a system that has been optimizing for your psychological stability since before you were born. The brain does not want chaos. It does not want uncertainty. It wants the known, and it will pay you in the currency of calm, of ease, of that deep settling sensation that tells you everything is fine, every single time you choose not to look too closely. The trap is that it works. The trap is that it feels exactly like wisdom. You probably think of yourself as someone who asks questions. Most people do. Most people have a story about themselves as a thinker, a seeker. someone who doesn't just accept things at face value. Hold that story loosely for a moment, because it is about to become complicated. Because there is a difference, a profound, invisible, crucial difference, between asking questions about things that don't threaten you and asking questions about the foundations of everything you are. The first kind of questioning feels like curiosity. It is safe. It keeps the structure intact while examining the decorations. The second kind of questioning is something else entirely. It is not comfortable. It does not feel like growth in the moment. It feels like loss, like standing on ground that may not be ground. And the mind, your mind specifically, this very mind reading these words, has developed exquisitely sophisticated ways of making sure you never go there. Not really. Not all the way you have opinions about the world. But how often do you hold those opinions up to the light and ask, what would it mean for my entire sense of self if this were wrong? Rarely, if ever. And there is a reason for that. The reason has a name in psychology, though the name understates how total it is: cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding contradictory information, the friction produced when a new truth collides with a settled belief. What the textbooks don't quite capture is the violence of it, not physical violence, but something that registers in the body as threat, as danger. The same system that evolved to keep you alive in environments where danger was a predator in the grass now activates when a book or a conversation or a quiet moment of reflection presents you with evidence that something you built your identity around might not be true. The brain does not distinguish neatly between this idea challenges me and this situation threatens my survival. Both produce the same chemical urgency. Both produce the same desperate need to resolve the tension, not by examining the belief, but by discrediting the threat. So you dismiss. You deflect. You find the flaw in the argument, the problem with the source, the reason this particular insight doesn't apply to you specifically. You feel the resistance, and you call it critical thinking. You feel the refusal, and you call it discernment. The system protects itself by disguising its own defense mechanisms as virtues. This is not weakness. This is the machinery running as designed. But it is running you. Think about the last time someone said something that genuinely unsettled your sense of self. Not insulted you, unsettled you. The specific interior tremor of an idea that got too close to something real. Notice what happened next. There was probably a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, where you actually felt it, where something opened, and then almost immediately the closing. The counter-argument that arrived fully formed, the memory that contradicted the claim, the sudden awareness of the speaker's flaws, their agenda, their lack of credentials, the way your mind moved, and moved fast, to contain whatever had just threatened to expand. That speed is not accidental. It has been practiced your entire life. It is a reflex so deeply conditioned that it feels like reason, but it is not reason. It is the system's immune response, and you are both the system and the thing it is protecting itself from. Here is what makes it darker still. The comfort of not knowing is not just internal. It is social. It is structural. The people around you, most of them, are operating in the same managed ignorance. And the unspoken contract of most social environments is that this will not be disturbed. There is enormous social pressure to remain within the boundaries of the thinkable, to have the approved questions, the acceptable doubts, the kind of skepticism that challenges details without ever threatening the larger frame. Venture outside those boundaries, not in performance, but genuinely, visibly, in a way that makes others aware that you are examining the foundation they are standing on, and watch what happens. The discomfort, the laughter that is not quite laughter, the subtle withdrawal of warmth, the way you are suddenly, quietly a problem. Communities do not just tolerate managed ignorance. They require it. They reproduce it. They reward those who stay within the lines, with belonging, with warmth, with the deep animal comfort of being part of the group, and they withdraw that reward from anyone who looks too carefully at the lines themselves. You learned this very young. You don't remember learning it, but you know it. In your body, in the way you edit yourself before speaking, in the thoughts you have that you don't say, in the questions you ask only in the privacy of your own skull, if you ask them at all. The comfort of not knowing is not just the absence of knowledge, it is a presence. It is a specific cultivated state, maintained actively, defended constantly, rewarded reliably. that serves a purpose so fundamental it has become indistinguishable from the self. The purpose is stability, the continuity of the identity you have assembled. Because the deepest terror is not the unknown. The deepest terror is the known becoming unknowable. The moment when the self you have been inhabiting reveals itself as a construction, and you are left holding the pieces without a blueprint. That terror has a sound. It is the silence that follows a question you cannot answer about yourself. The pause before the deflection. The breath taken before the topic is changed. You have heard it. In that silence, something true lives, something you have been circling your entire life without landing on. Not knowing is not neutral. Every hour spent in managed comfort is an hour the pattern runs unopposed. Every question not asked is an assumption that calcifies into certainty. Every door not opened becomes a wall, indistinguishable eventually from the ones that were always there. And the architecture of your inner life, the rooms you move through, the ceilings you accept, the spaces you never enter, was built as much from what you refused to examine as from what you did. The unexamined life is not a passive state. It is a daily construction project. You are building it right now. With every certainty you don't probe, every belief you don't audit, every discomfort you convert into irritation and set aside. The comfort is real, the cost is invisible, and the invisibility is not an accident, it is the whole point. Somewhere behind the warmth of the familiar, behind the soft sedation of the known, there is a question that has been waiting. Not loudly. It doesn't need to be loud, it has time. It has been there since the first moment you felt the tremor of something real, and chose in that fraction of a second the more comfortable direction. It is still there. Patient, unchanged, growing neither larger nor smaller, just waiting with the particular persistence of things that are true. You have felt it in the odd hour of a sleepless night, in the middle of a sentence you didn't finish, in the strange hollow that sometimes opens in the center of a life that looks by every external measure exactly as it should. That hollow is not emptiness. It is the shape of everything you have not yet been willing to know. Chapter 4. The Architects of Influence. Nobody forced you to think what you think. That's what makes it so perfect. There is no officer at the door of your mind, no authority figure standing over your shoulder dictating your opinions, your desires, your sense of what is true and what is not. You arrived at your beliefs freely, through your own experience, your own exposure, your own reasoning. This is what you believe. And this belief, this particular conviction that your inner life is self-authored, is the masterpiece of the architects, because the most complete form of control is the kind that never has to announce itself. The most effective cage is the one the prisoner helps build, maintains carefully, and would defend to the death if threatened. You have been defending yours for years. Consider the shape of your attention, not what you think about, but what you are drawn toward. The content that finds you, that holds you, that pulls you back, the voices you trust, the sources that feel credible, the ideas that seem obvious, and the ones that seem absurd. Now consider that this entire landscape, this specific personal feels-like mind terrain of what captures your mind, was not assembled by you. It was assembled for you, piece by piece, algorithmically, socially, institutionally, with a precision that no single human mind could achieve deliberately, but that emerges inevitably from systems designed around one principle. Keep the attention coming. You think you chose what to pay attention to, but attention, it turns out, is the most valuable commodity on earth. And the most valuable commodities always attract the most sophisticated architects. Start with the algorithm, not as a metaphor, but as a literal force operating on your cognition every single day. The feed you scroll, the recommendations, the content that rises to the top of every platform you use, and the content that quietly disappears. None of this is neutral, none of it is random. It is the output of systems that have been studying your behavior, your pauses, your clicks, your return rate, your emotional responses, with a granularity that far exceeds your own self-knowledge. The algorithm knows things about you that you don't. It knows which emotional register keeps you engaged longest. It knows the precise ratio of outrage to validation that will keep your thumb moving. It has modeled your psychology with millions of data points, and it is deploying that model against you in real time every time you open the app. And the result, the content it serves, the ideas it amplifies, the world it makes feel large or small, becomes the water you think in. You don't notice the water, you just notice your thoughts. But the algorithm is only the newest architect, the oldest ones wear faces you recognize. Think about the figures of authority that shaped your early world. The teacher whose approval rearranged something in your nervous system. The parent whose disappointment felt like a verdict on your fundamental worth. The institution, school, church, state, community, that presented its particular version of reality as simply the way things are, as gravity rather than ideology, as fact rather than choice. These figures did not need to be malicious, most of them were. They were themselves shaped by the architects who came before them, passing on the blueprint with total sincerity, doing what was done to them, and calling it love, calling it education, calling it truth. Authority does not require coercion. It requires only repetition and relationship. Tell a child the same thing enough times. Inside a relationship they depend on for survival, and the thing becomes true. Not just believed, true, encoded at the level of reflex. The child does not evaluate the claim. They absorb it, and then they grow and carry the absorbed truth into every subsequent encounter with the world, using it as the measuring stick by which all new information is judged. The authority figure is gone. The authority remains, running quietly, in the background of everything. There is a man, or a woman, or a voice, or a screen, that you trust more than you realize. Someone whose framing of events has become your framing, whose categories have become your categories, whose sense of what matters has quietly become your sense of what matters. You might call this person a mentor, or a journalist, or a philosopher, or a friend. You might not have a name for them at all. Just the ambient presence of a perspective that has been so consistently available, so reliably satisfying, so perfectly pitched to your existing beliefs, that it stopped feeling like a perspective and started feeling like perception itself. This is not coincidence. This is curation. Yours partly, because you kept returning to what confirmed you, but also theirs and the system's, because they understood, consciously or not, that the fastest path to permanent influence is not to challenge but to validate, to arrive where you already are and then gently begin to lead. You followed, not because you were naive, because the leading felt like thinking. Here is the mechanism beneath the mechanism, the one that makes all the others work. The brain is a prediction machine. It does not observe reality and then form beliefs. It forms predictions, models of what the world is, and then it observes reality through those models, filtering incoming information to confirm what it already expects. This is not a flaw. It is an efficiency. A brain that processed every input with fresh eyes every moment would be paralyzed. The models are necessary, but the models were installed, and the architects of influence. Every one of them, from the algorithm to the authority figure to the ambient culture, know instinctively or explicitly that the most powerful point of intervention is not what you think, but what you expect. Shape the expectation and you shape the perception. Shape the perception, and you don't need to shape anything else. You are not receiving information and forming beliefs. You are receiving confirmation and calling it information. Feel that somewhere? The specific discomfort of a paragraph that is accusing you of something you can't quite refute. Notice the resistance. Notice the part of you that wants to find the exception, the counterexample, the way this applies to other people but not quite to you. That response is not evidence that you are different. It is evidence of exactly what is being described. The architecture includes a self-defense mechanism, and it is just activated. The system that shapes your thinking also shapes your response to being told your thinking is shaped. It goes all the way down. The deepest layer of the architect's work is not in what you believe. It is in what you cannot imagine believing. Every worldview has edges, places where the mind simply stops, where alternative framings feel not just wrong, but somehow unthinkable, almost physically impossible to hold. You have these edges. Everyone does. And the location of your particular edges, the specific places where your imagination refuses to go, is a map of the most successful architecture. Those edges are not the boundaries of reality. They are the boundaries of the installation. The architects did not just fill the space inside. They built the walls. What you cannot question reveals more about your conditioning than anything you openly believe. Somewhere right now in a room you will never see, systems are being refined. Not with malice, That is still the wrong frame, still too simple, still too human, with optimization. With a cold, relentless efficiency of processes that measure only engagement, only retention, only the conversion of attention into behavior. These systems do not know your name. They know your pattern, and your pattern, fed back to you daily, amplified, confirmed, shaped at the edges, is becoming more itself with every passing hour. More predictable, more consistent, more legible to the architects who read it. The self you are most certain of, the core, the genuine, the irreducible you, is the part that has been most thoroughly mapped. And the map was not made for your benefit. There is a particular kind of loneliness that arrives when you begin to see this clearly. Not the loneliness of isolation, the loneliness of the uncertain, of standing inside a self you built with borrowed materials and realizing you cannot immediately locate what, if anything, is original. What remains when you remove the family's blueprint, the culture's design, the algorithm's curation, the authority's voice? What is underneath the architecture? That question does not have a comfortable answer. It may not have an immediate answer at all. But the architects, every single one of them, are counting on you never asking it. They have been counting on it from the beginning. And until right now, they were right. Chapter 5. The Feedback Loop Prison. You are not just a victim of the system. You are its engine. This is the part no one wants to hear, because everything up to this point has allowed for a certain comfortable distance. The architects are out there. The conditioning happened back then. The script was written by others. The algorithm was designed by someone else in a building you'll never enter. There is a faint consolation in that framing. The consolation of the acted upon, of the shaped. But here in this chapter, that distance collapses because the mechanism that runs you does not run on external power alone. It runs on you. On your clicks, your reactions, your habits, your retreats, your confirmations, your avoidances. Every move you make inside the system teaches the system how to hold you more tightly. Every loop you complete makes the next loop easier to enter and harder to leave. You have been fueling your own cage, daily, reliably, with extraordinary precision. There is a pattern in your life that you have noticed and not noticed. Not a dramatic pattern, not addiction or catastrophe. Nothing with enough weight to demand examination, just a quiet, persistent groove. The way certain situations always seem to end the same way. The way particular emotions arrive on cue, triggered by stimuli so familiar they barely register as triggers anymore. The relationship dynamic that repeats across different people with different faces. The professional ceiling that appears in every context, dressed differently each time, but always at the same height. The internal conversation, the one about your worth, your capability, your right to want what you want. That runs on what feels like an infinite loop, arriving at the same conclusions, through the same arguments, with the same emotional texture every single time. You have probably attributed this pattern to something fixed in you, personality, fate, the particular shape of your damage. You have made peace with it, the way you make peace with a scar, by incorporating it into the story of who you are, by learning to say this is just how I am with enough conviction that it stops feeling like resignation and starts feeling like self-knowledge. But it is not a scar, it is a loop. And loops are not destiny. They are mechanics. Here is how a feedback loop actually works inside a human life, stripped of the clinical language that makes it easy to understand abstractly and impossible to feel personally. Something happens. It might be external, a social situation, a moment of pressure, an unexpected demand. Or it might be internal, a thought that arrives uninvited, a feeling that rises without apparent cause. Your system responds, not with consideration, not with deliberate choice, but with the response it has made 100 times before in situations that registered as similar. Fast, automatic, preloaded. The response produces an outcome. Relief, perhaps, temporary comfort, the edge of the anxiety blunted, the social threat avoided, the uncomfortable feeling suppressed. And that outcome, the relief, the temporary resolution, is registered as reward, as success, as the right move. And the next time a similar trigger arrives, the same response comes faster, more automatically, with less of whatever slim margin of hesitation existed before. This is learning. The same mechanism that taught you language and how to walk and where danger lives is the mechanism reinforcing every loop you're trapped in. The brain does not distinguish between useful learning and destructive learning. It only knows, this produced relief, do this again. Do it faster next time. You are getting better and better at the things that are keeping you exactly where you are. Think about anxiety, specifically yours, in its particular form, with its specific triggers and its reliable staging. The thought arrives, the body responds, the chest tightens, or the mind accelerates, or something contracts behind the sternum. And then, what? For most people, the answer is escape, distraction. The phone picked up, the task avoided, the conversation deflected. The feeling numbed through whatever mechanism you have learned works fastest for you, and the anxiety retreats, temporarily, reliably, just enough. And here's what the retreat teaches your brain every single time. The escape worked. The avoidance was correct. The thing avoided was therefore dangerous. The threat was real. And the next time that same class of stimulus appears, the demanding email, the social uncertainty, the creative risk, the vulnerable conversation, the alarm will sound faster, louder, with more conviction, because it has been confirmed repeatedly by your own behavior that the alarm is necessary. You did not just experience anxiety. You trained it. You made it stronger through every act of relief. And you called it coping. The feedback loop prison is not built from bars. It is built from rewards. This is what makes it so exquisitely difficult to escape, because every mechanism keeping you inside feels like something good. The scroll that relieves the restlessness. The agreement that relieves the social friction. The familiar choice that relieves the uncertainty of the new. The story you tell about yourself that relieves the discomfort of not knowing who you are. Each retreat is a small mercy, and each small mercy is a brick. You build the walls yourself, one relieved breath at a time, and then you stand inside and feel the inexplicable claustrophobia of a life that has everything it's supposed to have and still feels airless. The prison was constructed in the currency of comfort. You paid for every wall yourself. Now go deeper, because the loop is not just behavioral, it is perceptual. The confirmation bias described in earlier chapters is not a passive tendency. It is actively maintained and strengthened by behavior. When you act in accordance with a belief, you generate evidence for that belief. The person who believes they are unworthy of love behaves in ways subtle, largely invisible, sometimes microscopic, that make love harder to receive. They pull back at moments of closeness. They interpret ambiguity as rejection. They create small frictions that confirm the story, not consciously, not deliberately, but reliably. And then the belief is confirmed, not by the world, but by the interaction between the belief and the world that the belief itself engineered. The loop is self-validating. It uses reality as its proof, having quietly shaped that reality in its own image. You are not observing your life and drawing conclusions. You are generating your life from your conclusions and calling it observation. There is a moment, and you may have experienced it without quite naming it, where you catch yourself mid-pattern. In the half-second before the automatic response closes over the situation and the loop completes again. A faint awareness like briefly surfacing from a dream while still inside it. You almost see it, the groove you are about to step back into, the response you are about to perform for the 1000th time. And for just a moment with the half-life of smoke, there is a flicker of something that is not the pattern, a hesitation, a question, the dim sensation that this particular move is familiar in a way that has nothing to do with it being right. And then, the moment closes, the loop completes, and you are back inside, with the faint residue of something you can't quite name. That flicker is not nothing, but it is also not enough, not yet. Because seeing the loop from inside the loop using the same cognitive equipment that the loop built, with the same perceptual filters the loop installed, is like trying to read the label from inside the bottle. The awareness exists. The exit does not automatically follow. This is the part where the darkness deepens, because here is the thing about feedback loops that the comfortable version of this conversation leaves out. They do not stay the same size. They tighten. Every completion of a loop makes the walls marginally closer. Every confirmation of a belief makes the filter marginally thicker. Every year spent inside a behavioral pattern makes the pattern marginally more automatic, the trigger marginally more sensitive, the exit marginally less visible. A loop you could have stepped out of at 20 requires something closer to surgery at 40. Not because you are weaker, because the loop has been learning too. It has had as much practice as you have, and it has been using all of it. Time is not neutral in a feedback loop. Time is the material the walls are made of. You have a loop that has been running longer than you want to admit. You know the one. The pattern you have restarted more times than you have counted. The version of yourself you return to despite every intention to have left it behind. The story that ends the same way, regardless of the new cast members you introduce into it. You have tried to interrupt it with willpower, with insight, with geographic change, with new relationships, with the sheer force of wanting to be different, and the loop absorbed all of it. Filed it under temporary anomaly, baited, and resumed, not because you are beyond change, because you have been trying to exit the loop using the same mind the loop built. The lock and the key are made of the same material, and somewhere in the space between that problem and its solution, somewhere in the terrifying gap between seeing the prison clearly and knowing how to leave it, is where you actually are right now. Inside it, aware of it, still inside it, and the next move is not yet clear. Chapter 6, Emotional Hijacking. Your emotions feel like the most honest thing about you. That is precisely why they are the easiest thing to weaponize, not by you against you, by everything that has ever needed your behavior to move in a particular direction. Every system, every architect, every algorithm, every person who understood, consciously or intuitively, that the fastest path to a human being's actions is not through their reasoning. Reasoning is slow. Reasoning asks questions. Reasoning can be interrupted by a counter-argument, by doubt, by the simple friction of wait. Let me think about this. But emotion moves at a different speed entirely. Emotion arrives before thought. It colors the thought before the thought has fully formed. And by the time you are aware that you feel something, the emotion has already begun directing traffic, deciding what information matters, what threat requires response, what action feels necessary, what version of events feels true. You do not think and then feel. You feel, and then your thinking explains the feeling. Everything that has ever wanted something from you knows this and has always known it. You believe your emotional responses are authentic because they feel authentic. Of course they do. The feeling of authenticity is itself an emotional response, and it is generated by the same system that generates all the others. When you feel outrage, the outrage is real. The chemistry is real, the physical sensation is real, the urgency it creates is real. But real and yours are not the same thing. A fire is real whether it started naturally or was deliberately set. The question that matters, the question almost nobody asks in the moment of burning, is who lit it and why, and what they needed to burn. Your outrage was lit, your fear was lit, your desire, your longing, your particular brand of insecurity that arrives on cue in specific social situations, lit, tended, amplified by forces that benefit from the heat. The emotion is not fake. The origin is not what you assumed. Consider the last time you felt strongly about something. Not privately, quietly, strongly. Publicly, urgently, share it now strongly. The news story that made your blood move. The social situation that produced a reaction so fast it was out of your mouth before you'd processed it. The piece of content that made you feel, briefly, that you understood exactly who the enemy was and what needed to be done. Hold that memory. Now ask with real precision. Before you encountered the trigger, were you already in a state that made you susceptible? Were you tired or understimulated? Or carrying a low-grade anxiety from something unrelated? Because emotional hijacking does not operate on calm, centered nervous systems. It operates on primed ones, on the body already humming with unprocessed tension, looking for somewhere to land. The trigger did not create your emotional state. It completed it. It gave direction to energy that was already looking for a target. And the systems that deliver triggers to you, the feeds, the headlines, the curated provocations, have had years to learn exactly when your nervous system is most susceptible, exactly which categories of content produce the fastest ignition, exactly how much stimulation keeps you engaged without satisfying you. Satisfaction is the enemy of continued engagement. So the emotional content is calibrated not to resolve but to escalate, not to answer but to inflame. The goal is not your understanding. The goal is your activation. You have been activated so many times that activation feels like caring. There is a subtler form of this that operates not in the dramatic arenas of outrage and fear, but in the quiet register of daily life. And it is more insidious, precisely because it is quieter. The mild shame that arrives when you compare your life to the curated version of someone else's. That is not accidental. The vague inadequacy that hums beneath the surface of a day spent consuming images of what success, beauty, belonging, and purpose are supposed to look like. That hum was engineered, not by a single villain, but by a system that learned, through billions of data points, that mild inadequacy is extraordinarily effective at producing continued engagement. A person who feels subtly lacking will keep scrolling to find the thing that resolves the lack. The resolution never comes, because the platform is not in the business of resolution. It is in the business of the seeking. And so the inadequacy persists and the scrolling continues, and the system grows more precise in its delivery of the particular flavor of not enough that keeps you returning. You are not consuming content. You are being farmed. Your emotional state is the crop. Now go somewhere more personal, because this chapter is not primarily about platforms and algorithms. Those are the visible machinery. The deeper mechanics live in your relationships, your history, your body. Long before any algorithm touched you, the people around you were learning, unconsciously, instinctively, which emotional registers produced the responses they needed from you. The parent who needed your guilt to maintain control. The partner who needed your anxiety to feel necessary. The friend who needed your admiration to feel real. None of them sat down and designed a strategy. They simply discovered through the trial and error of human relationship what worked, what made you compliant, or attentive, or available, or small. And your nervous system learned the corresponding lesson. These emotions are load-bearing. These feelings are what relationships are built on. Guilt means someone needs you. Fear means you must perform. Shame means you have exceeded your permitted dimensions and must contract. These are not conclusions you consciously drew. They are reflexes, installed early, reinforced constantly, running now in your adult life, in your adult relationships, with the same automatic fidelity that makes your eyes blink when something comes too close. You learned to feel in ways that served the people who needed something from you. And then you grew up and called those feelings your personality. Here is where the architecture reveals its most elegant cruelty. The emotions that were installed to make you manageable are also the emotions you most identify with. The anxiety that was reinforced until it became your constant companion now feels like you, like your sensitivity, your depth, your awareness of danger. The guilt that was cultivated until it became reflexive now feels like your conscience, like your ethics, your care, your refusal to be someone who doesn't feel the weight of things. The emotions that were the heaviest tools of your conditioning are the ones you would most resist losing, because losing them would feel like losing yourself. The cage was built to feel like a self. There is a particular experience that almost everyone has had, and almost no one has examined clearly. You are in a conversation, an argument, or a moment of tension, or a discussion that matters, and suddenly you are not quite yourself. Something has been said or implied, or suggested by tone or expression, that has landed somewhere below conscious thought and produced a reaction that is disproportionate or strange or old. You feel it, the specific emotional weather of a much earlier moment, visiting this present one like a ghost wearing contemporary clothes. You may even know distantly that the reaction is too large for the stimulus. But you cannot stop it. The emotion has authority that reason doesn't. It arrived first. It has seniority. What visited you in that moment was not the present situation. It was the record, the specific emotional frequency that the present situation matched against your stored archive of threat and pain and need. The hijacking was completed before you knew a hijack was in progress. And now you are acting from a wound that may be decades old, in a moment that had nothing to do with it, toward a person who did not cause it. And it feels completely real, because it is completely real. And because real and appropriate are not the same thing, and the difference between them is the entire distance between reacting and responding, what is almost never discussed is the economy of emotional hijacking, the specific transactions it enables. When your fear is activated, you become risk-averse, and risk-averse people are easier to keep in position. When your shame is activated, you become self-focused, and self-focused people are easier to redirect. When your outrage is activated, you become tribal, and tribal people are easier to organize against a designated target. When your inadequacy is activated, you become hungry, and hungry people buy things. Each emotional state is a behavioral disposition, and behavioral dispositions are the actual product being sold, manufactured, distributed, and consumed. Not the content, not the news, not the social interaction. The emotional state is the end product. Your changed behavior is the return on investment. Someone or some system profits every time you feel what you are feeling. The moment this becomes undeniable, not as an idea, but as a physical recognition, something felt in the body rather than processed in the mind, it changes the texture of experience, not immediately, not completely, but something shifts in the quality of attention you bring to your own emotional life. A small, crucial gap opens between the emotion arriving and your total identification with it. Not detachment, not numbness, something more precise than either. The capacity to feel fully while simultaneously asking, what is this for? And who lit it? And do I actually want to go where it is trying to take me? That question does not resolve the emotion. It does not make you less human. It makes you, for the first time, a participant in your own emotional life rather than just its vehicle. The hijacking cannot be stopped. Not entirely, not yet. The machinery is too pervasive, the conditioning too deep, the architecture too embedded in the tissue of daily experience to be dismantled by awareness alone. But there is a difference, a real, consequential, life-altering difference, between a hijacking you don't know is happening and one you watch from the inside as it unfolds. One takes you completely, the other takes you, but you know where you went. Chapter 7. Identity as a Weapon. The thing you would die to protect is the thing being used against you most completely. Not your body, not your family, not your possessions or your reputation or any of the external coordinates of your life. The thing being used, the most perfectly leveraged point of control in the entire architecture of influence, is your sense of who you are, your identity, that deep, wordless conviction that there is a you that persists, that has defining qualities, that stands for certain things and not others, that would recognize itself in a mirror even if everything else changed. That conviction is real. The feeling of it is genuine. But the content, the specific qualities, the particular allegiances, the precise shape of the self you protect, that content was installed. And once installed, it became the most powerful tool the system has, because you will defend it without being asked. You will police your own borders. You will do the work of your own containment, voluntarily, fiercely, at significant personal cost. Because threatening the identity feels indistinguishable from threatening survival itself. The jailer realized at some point that the most efficient prison is one the prisoner mistakes for a soul. You have things you would call non-negotiable about yourself. Not preferences, identities. Not I tend to, but I am. I am honest. I am loyal. I am someone who doesn't back down. I am not the kind of person who does that. These statements feel different from opinions. They feel foundational. They feel like they are describing something real and fixed at the center of you, something discovered rather than constructed. And because they feel discovered, because the sense of recognition is so strong, the resonance so deep, it never quite occurs to question the process by which the discovery was made. Who built the mirror? What did you see before you knew what you were looking for? What were you told and rewarded for and punished away from in the years before you had the language to call any of it identity? Because here is the mechanism. Identity is not found, it is confirmed, over and over through thousands of small social transactions, through the expressions on faces when you said certain things, through what was received and what was rejected, through the gradual, invisible process of learning, which version of yourself got warmth and which got cold. You did not discover who you were. You constructed the version of yourself most viable in the specific environment you were born into. And then, because that construction was rewarded and reinforced until it felt natural, you forgot it was a construction at all. The forgetting is not a side effect. It is the feature. Now watch what the system does with it. Once an identity is formed, once the I am statements are in place, solid and defended, they become extraordinary leverage points. Because an identity is not just a belief about the self. It is a commitment to future behavior. An I am honest person cannot lie without internal cost. An I am loyal person cannot leave without internal cost. An I am not someone who gives up person cannot rest without internal cost. The identity is a pre-made behavioral contract, signed in advance, covering situations the self has not yet encountered, enforceable not by any external authority, but by the unbearable internal sensation of being at war with your own definition of yourself. You do things every day, costly things, limiting things, things that serve systems and people and structures rather than you, not because you were forced, and not because you reasoned your way there, but because not doing them would mean being someone you are not. The identity is the enforcement mechanism. It works without supervision. It works while you sleep. It works so well that the behavior it produces feels like integrity rather than control. The most brilliant chains are the ones you call your backbone. Think about a time you did something that didn't serve you, stayed too long, gave too much, swallowed something that should have been said, performed a version of yourself in a context that was costing you, and justified it with an identity statement. I'm not someone who walks away. I keep my word. This is just who I am. The statement felt like strength. It felt like character, and maybe it was partly. But follow it further. Follow it to where it hurt, where it cost, where it produced the specific exhaustion of maintaining a self that the situation demanded, rather than a self that was genuinely present, and ask, was this integrity, or was this the cage enforcing its own dimensions? The two feel identical from the inside. That is the entire problem. There is a particular form of suffering that is invisible because it is voluntary, because it comes dressed in the language of choice. The person who cannot allow themselves softness because their identity is built around strength. The person who cannot receive help because their identity is built around independence. The person who cannot change their position because their identity is built around consistency, and changing their mind would feel like losing themselves rather than finding something truer. They are not being held in these configurations by force. They are being held by the thing they most identify with. The suffering is real. The prison is invisible, because the prison has a name, and the name is me. You have one of these. Everyone does. A place where the identity has calcified around a wound and called it character, where what began as a survival strategy, be strong, need nothing, never waver, became so central to the sense of self that removing it feels like amputation rather than healing. The system does not need to maintain this. You maintain it yourself daily with extraordinary dedication, because the alternative, the soft, uncertain, unfinished self that exists beneath the identity, feels like nothing at all, and nothing feels like annihilation. Here is the darker architecture beneath this. Identities are not just personally maintained, they are socially enforced. The people around you have built their relationship with you around the identity you present. They have expectations organized by it. They have roles they play in relation to yours. When you shift, when the I am begins to soften or change or reveal its constructed nature, the social environment does not simply accommodate. It resists. It reflects the old version back at you with a particular urgency, old nicknames, old stories, the specific way people reference your defining traits as if to anchor you to the version they know. Not maliciously, but the effect is maintenance. The social world conspires, collectively and unconsciously, to keep you legible, to keep you the self they have learned to navigate. Change threatens not just your own identity, but the entire relational system built around it. And the system punishes the threat by withdrawing the thing it has always offered in exchange for your consistency. Recognition, belonging, the warm animal comfort of being known. You stay yourself partly because being yourself is the price of being loved. And then there is the identity as tribal membership, the dimension that makes this not just personal, but civilizational. In a world of overwhelming complexity, where certainty is scarce, and the self is perpetually threatened by more information than it can integrate, identity groups offer something irresistible, the pre-made answer, the ready-made conclusion. The community of people who already know what you know, already see what you see, already feel the particular configuration of pride and grievance and belonging that defines the tribe. Join, and the cognitive load of being an individual in an uncertain world is dramatically reduced. Join, and your identity is no longer something you have to maintain alone. It is maintained collectively, reinforced constantly, celebrated when expressed, and defended by others when threatened. But the tribe requires purchase price. The price is the opinions, the allegiances, the identities that come prepackaged with membership. You don't get to select from the menu. You take the set, and slowly, because belonging is a biological need and not an optional feature, the tribal identity becomes indistinguishable from the personal one. You cannot tell anymore which beliefs are yours and which came with the group. You cannot tell where the individual ends and the membership begins. You just know that attacking the tribe feels like attacking you, and defending the tribe feels like expressing the most authentic version of yourself. The system gave you a self. The self required a tribe. The tribe required an enemy. And now you have all three, and you call it knowing who you are. What would remain if you removed it? Not replace it. Remove it. The label, the allegiance, the non-negotiables, the definitional traits, the membership, the story of origin and struggle and arrival that gives the identity its coherence. If all of that were taken away, not destroyed but simply set aside, held loosely instead of gripped, what would be there? Most people cannot sit with this question for more than a few seconds before the identity reassembles itself defensively. Before the "but, I really am" arguments arrive. Before the exceptions are noted, before the reconstruction begins. Because the question is experienced as a threat rather than an inquiry, the system has made sure of this. An identity under examination is an identity at risk of change. And an identity at risk of change is a behavioral contract under renegotiation. And no system that depends on predictable human behavior can afford that. So the question is answered before it is asked. The door closes before you reach it. But here, in this specific moment, before the reconstruction fully completes, in the half-breath between the question and the reassembly, there is something, not nothing, something. Something that existed before the first "I am" was spoken over you by someone who needed you to be a particular shape. Something that has been present beneath every identity you have ever worn. Patient in the way that depth is patient, unchanged in the way that the bottom of a river is unchanged by the surface's turbulence. You have glimpsed it in moments of complete solitude, in the aftermath of loss so total that the identity had nothing to hold on to, in the rare strange clarity of a moment when all the labels fell away and something remained that was simply present, aware, undefended. The system has no leverage there, which is exactly why it has spent your entire life making sure you never stay long. Chapter 8. The Fear of Stepping Outside. You have seen the cage. That's the part nobody tells you about, but seeing it isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning of a different kind of trapped, because the cruelest stage is not the one where you are inside the system, unaware, moving through your conditioned life with the serene confidence of someone who has never questioned the walls. That stage has its own suffering, but it has the mercy of unconsciousness. The cruelest stage is this one, the one you are in now, or approaching or circling with the specific anxiety of someone who knows too much to go back and not enough to go forward. You have seen the architecture. You have recognized the loops. You have felt at least fleetingly the constructed nature of the self you were handed. And yet, here you are, still inside, still performing the patterns, still waking up in the same configuration, making the same familiar moves, living at roughly the same depth as before. The knowledge changed nothing. And you are starting to wonder if that means something is profoundly wrong with you. It doesn't. But the reason it changed nothing is darker than you want it to be. You thought awareness was the door. You have been sold this idea in 1,000 different forms. The insight that transforms, the realization that liberates, the moment of clarity that reorganizes everything downstream of it. And there is truth in it. But the truth has been cleaned up, made palatable, stripped of the actual texture of what liberation requires, because awareness in isolation does not free you from the system. Awareness in isolation simply makes you a conscious prisoner rather than an unconscious one, and conscious imprisonment is, in many ways, more painful. You now see the bars, you feel their specific dimensions, you know their names, and you also know that you are not leaving, Not yet, not easily. Not without a cost that your nervous system has been calculating since the moment you started getting close to the edge. The cost is everything the system has been paying you to stay. Let's be specific about what waits outside. Not in the inspirational version of this conversation. The one where stepping outside the system leads immediately to authentic selfhood and meaningful freedom and the clean, bright air of the uncontrolled life. In the real version, the version your body already knows, even if your mind hasn't fully articulated it. Outside the system, outside the conditioned identity, the inherited beliefs, the social contracts, the feedback loops, the tribe, is uncertainty so total it registers as physical threat. It is not the uncertainty of not knowing which option to choose. It is the uncertainty of not knowing who is choosing. The dissolution of the familiar self, even a self that was built by others, even a self that has cost you enormously, is experienced by the nervous system as a form of death. Not metaphorical death, the kind the amygdala cannot distinguish from the real thing. This is why people who glimpse the truth retreat, not because they are cowardly, not because they lack commitment to growth, but because the biological machinery that kept your ancestors alive by keeping them attached to the known is the same machinery activating now, sending the same signal it has always sent. When something familiar was about to be abandoned, danger, stop, return. You are fighting millions of years of survival engineering with a few months of intellectual awakening. The engineering is currently winning. And then there is the loneliness. This is the part that the books about awakening mention briefly and then move past, as if it were a minor inconvenience rather than the primary reason most people turn back. When you begin to step outside the system, you do not step outside alone. You step outside the shared reality of everyone still inside. And shared reality is not just a philosophical concept. It is the literal substrate of human connection. It is what makes conversation possible, what makes belonging feel real, what makes the presence of other people feel like company rather than proximity. When your reality diverges, when you have seen things that cannot be unseen, when the questions you are carrying no longer fit the conversations around you, the loneliness that arrives is not ordinary loneliness. It is the loneliness of having changed coordinates while everyone you love remained exactly where they were. You are still in the same room with them, but you are not in the same world. Here is a moment you may recognize. You are in a conversation with a friend, a family member, someone whose company you have always valued, and something is said. Something that 6 months ago you would have agreed with, or at least passed without friction, a comfortable assumption, a shared certainty, the kind of thing that functions as social glue, as proof of membership, as the small constant reassurance that you and this person see the world the same way. But now you don't. You feel the gap between what was said and what you actually think. And you face the calculus that every person in this stage faces. Do you say what you actually think and risk the warmth of the moment, the ease of the relationship, the sense of being on the same team? Or do you let it pass and keep the connection intact and go home afterward with the faint metallic taste of the self you swallowed to afford it? Most people swallow, most time, because the relationship is real and the connection is real, and the cost of disrupting it is immediate and tangible, while the cost of the swallowing is diffuse, accumulative, paid in small invisible installments over years of being slightly less present than you actually are. And the system survives, carried forward in the silence, reproduced in the swallowing. There is a fear beneath the fear of loneliness, and it is rarely named because naming it requires a level of honesty that is genuinely difficult. It is the fear that stepping outside will reveal not freedom but emptiness. That beneath the conditioned self, the inherited beliefs, the tribal identity, the emotional programming, there is nothing particularly original or remarkable waiting. That the self you discover on the other side of the construction is not a truer, deeper, more luminous version of you. That it is just quieter, less defined, less certain. Without the scaffolding of what you were given, you might simply be less. And less is the thing the ego has been defending against from the beginning. Less is what all the architecture was built to prevent you from feeling. What if the freedom is emptier than the cage? That question is the most effective guardian the system has. More effective than social pressure. More effective than fear of judgment. More effective than the withdrawal of belonging. because it strikes at the precise thing that makes the seeking of freedom worthwhile. The belief that there is something worth finding. Undermine that belief, and the door stays closed, not locked from the outside, held shut from within, by the hand of a self that would rather be constructed than dissolved. The people who have actually moved through this, not the ones who narrate it cleanly from the other side, with the benefit of hindsight simplification, but the ones honest enough to describe the actual transit, report the same thing in different languages with the same core texture. The passage through the fear is not a single moment of courage. It is not a decision made once. It is a daily, sometimes hourly, recommitment to remaining in the discomfort of uncertainty rather than retreating to the comfort of the known. It is the willingness to be, for an indeterminate period, genuinely unmoored, without the old identity fully intact and without a new one yet formed. To exist in the between, to be, for a time, the question rather than the answer. This is not a place most people choose to live. The between is cold, it is disorient. It does not respond to the need for reassurance, because reassurance requires a stable self that can be reassured, and the stable self is precisely what is in transition. The between offers nothing but the raw experience of being present without the usual armor, and that for most people is intolerable. Not because they are weak, because they are human. And being human means being wired for exactly the kind of certainty and belonging that the between temporarily removed. But here is what is also true, and it is important enough to sit with even though it doesn't resolve the difficulty. The fear of stepping outside is not evidence that the outside is dangerous. It is evidence of how much was invested in the inside. The intensity of the fear is a map of the depth of the conditioning. The more violently the system resists examination, the more completely it has colonized the self. The panic you feel at the edge of your own unscripted existence is not a warning. It is a measurement. It is telling you exactly how thorough the work was, which means it is also telling you how significant the undoing would be. You are standing at a threshold you have approached before, in different forms, in different contexts, at different points in your life. Each time something sent you back. The loneliness, the uncertainty, the fear of the empty room, the pull of the familiar, the voice that said this is who you are, and who you are is enough, and leaving is loss rather than gain. Each time the return felt like wisdom, like groundedness, like the mature recognition that the examined life still has to be lived, and living requires foundation, and foundation requires some things to remain unquestioned. Maybe, or maybe each return was the system catching you at the last moment. Maybe each retreat was the cage door closing with the soft, conclusive sound of a comfort you chose over the terrifying, disorienting, necessary encounter with what is actually there. The threshold is still there. It has always been there. It will continue to be there. Patient in the way that real things are patient, waiting in the way that true questions wait, not diminishing with time, not becoming easier to ignore, just remaining with the steady presence of the unfinished. The fear has not gone anywhere, neither have you. And neither, somewhere beneath all of it, has the thing that kept bringing you back to the edge in the first place. That restless, unkillable insistence that there is something on the other side of what you were given worth the cost of finding out. That insistence is not the system. That may be the first thing in this entire book that isn't. Chapter 9. The moment you notice. There is no going back from this. You may not have realized that yet. The moment of noticing, the real one, not the intellectual exercise of considering these ideas from a comfortable distance, but the visceral, embodied, stomach-dropping recognition that the pattern is real, and it is running and it is yours. That moment does not reverse. It cannot be unthought. It cannot be metabolized back into the comfortable numbness that preceded it. You can suppress it. You can bury it under activity and noise and the elaborate business of a life that demands constant forward motion. But it will resurface in the pause between thoughts, in the strange hollow of a moment that should feel full. In the middle of a reaction, you are watching yourself perform with the new, terrible clarity of someone who can see the mechanism while it is still moving. This is what noticing actually is. Not enlightenment, not liberation, a splinter. Something that has gotten under the skin of your ordinary existence and will not stop being felt. The noticing begins differently for everyone, but it has the same quality of wrongness. A response arrives and it is too familiar, too quick, too perfectly shaped to fit the situation as if it had been preloaded, waiting for exactly this trigger. Stored somewhere in the deep architecture of you like a prepared statement. You said something you have said before, in different words, to a different person, in a different year, and something in you recognized the repetition, even as the words were leaving your mouth. Or you felt something, a specific contraction, a specific emotional weather, that you have felt in this exact configuration so many times that it registered not as a feeling, but as a script, as stage direction. Enter anxiety here. Deliver familiar line, exit through habitual response. And for a fraction of a second, you were outside it watching. Then the fraction ended, the pattern closed, and you were back inside, carrying the faint residue of the observation, like something half remembered from a dream. That fraction of a second is the most important thing that has ever happened to you. Larger events have occurred in your life, nothing more significant than that gap. Here is what makes noticing unbearable in ways that transcend ordinary discomfort. It is cumulative. The first time you catch the pattern, it is almost easy to dismiss. A strange moment. 3 data points make a pattern visible in a way that one cannot. And a visible pattern cannot be experienced anymore as simply the way things are. It must now be experienced as a thing that happens, which means it can be examined, which means it was never as natural or inevitable as it felt, which means the self that performed it was never as free as it believed. Every subsequent noticing adds to the weight of this recognition. Every repetition you catch becomes another piece of evidence in a case you are building against your own unconsciousness, and the case becomes eventually impossible to dismiss. The pattern is real. The pattern is yours. The pattern is not you, and yet it keeps running through you as you, while you watch. What arrives alongside the noticing is a specific form of grief that almost nobody names as grief because it doesn't look like loss. It looks like irritation or restlessness or the vague dissatisfaction of someone who should be content and can't locate why they aren't. But it is grief. It is the mourning of the self that felt sovereign, the self that acted and felt and responded without the paralyzing metacognition of watching itself do all of these things. Before the noticing, you were fully inside your experience. After, there is always a part of you that is outside it too, observing, cataloging, slightly estranged from the immediacy of your own life. The price of seeing the machinery is that you can never entirely forget you are machinery. You lost something when you started to see. You lost the innocence of complete immersion, the full, unguarded presence of a self that didn't know it was a pattern. That loss is real, and it deserves to be felt. And most people in this stage carry it without recognizing it as loss, and therefore cannot grieve it, and therefore cannot move through it. They just feel subtly, persistently, inexplicably bereft. The noticing happens in layers. This is important because the first layer is almost always about external patterns. The behavioral loops, the emotional responses, the relationship dynamics that repeat. These are the easiest to see because they are at least partially visible from the outside. Someone else could potentially see them too. They exist in time, in behavior, in the traceable territory of action and consequence. The first layer of noticing produces a certain quality of revelation. I keep doing this thing. Uncomfortable, actionable in principle, still manageable. The second layer is harder. It is the noticing of the noticing. The recognition that even your response to the pattern, the self-examination, the commitment to change, the narrative you construct about your own growth, is itself pattern. That the person who is doing the examining was built by the same system as the person being examined. That the tools you are using to see the conditioning are themselves condition tools. That your version of waking up looks remarkably similar to versions performed by people in your particular cultural and intellectual context. Follows a recognizable arc. Uses a familiar vocabulary, arrives at conclusions that were somehow already available in the environment you inhabit. Even the awakening was scripted. That is the second layer, and the second layer is where many people stop, because it introduces a recursion that feels like it could swallow everything, including the ground you thought you were standing on while you looked down. There is a specific moment. You may have already had it, or you are approaching it, where the noticing turns on a conversation in real time and simply does not stop. You are talking and you are watching yourself talk, selecting words, performing concern or humor or authority, managing the impression being formed in another mind, doing the 100 small invisible things that social interaction requires. And you are watching all of it simultaneously, from a strange interior distance that feels like being a ventriloquist and the dummy at the same time. The performance is perfect, the watcher is nauseated, and the performance continues. Because stopping mid-conversation to announce I am watching myself perform right now. And I don't know if any of this is real, is not a socially available option. So you finish the conversation, you say the right things, you leave at the appropriate moment. And then you are alone, and the watcher and the performer are still both there, and neither of them knows quite what to do with the other. This is the thing about the moment you notice that makes it unlike every other moment of difficulty in your life. It cannot be solved. Not in the way that problems are solved. Not by acquiring the right information, or making the right decision, or changing the right behavior. The noticing is not a problem with a solution. It is a change in the quality of your consciousness itself. And changes of that kind do not resolve. They develop. They deepen, or they are suppressed. But they do not go away, and they do not arrive at a tidy conclusion. You are now a person who sees certain things. The seeing will continue. What changes is your relationship to the seeing, whether you resist it or move with it, whether you make it a source of paralysis or a source of something rarer and harder to name. But that development takes time. And in the meantime, you are here, noticing, uncomfortable, unable to stop. There is a particular quality of silence that this stage produces. Not the silence of peace, and not the silence of emptiness. The silence of someone listening very carefully to something they are not sure they want to hear. You are in conversations and you hear the subtext. You are in situations and you feel the architecture. You are in your own head and you hear the loops cycling, the scripts running, the inherited voices delivering their familiar verdicts in what used to pass for your own internal voice. You hear it now, the slight wrongness of the frequency. The way certain thoughts arrive preformed, fully dressed, to complete, to have been genuinely generated in the moment. Received thoughts performing as original ones. Installed conclusions presenting as fresh insights. You hear it, you cannot unhear it. And the world, which previously had the comfortable opacity of something simply experienced, now has the slightly vertiginous transparency of something being seen through. Something is happening to you that cannot be undone. You are standing inside a life that fits less well than it used to. Not because the life has changed, but because your vision had. The same clothes, the same rooms, the same relationships, the same reflexes. But now with the faint, persistent, impossible to ignore sensation that all of it was constructed before you arrived and has been waiting this entire time for someone to look at it directly. You are looking at it directly. Perhaps for the first time. And the looking is not the end. The looking is not even the beginning of the end. The looking is just the first moment in which something like an actual beginning becomes possible. Not comfortable, not clear, not accompanied by any guarantee that what comes after is better than what came before. Just possible, for the first time, possible. Chapter 10. The Fracture. Nobody tells you that the truth can break something in you that doesn't heal back the same way. They tell you the truth will set you free. They do not tell you what the freedom costs, or what you look like in the period between the breaking and the rebuilding, or whether the person who emerges on the other side bears enough resemblance to the one who went in to justify using the same name. They skip that part, the part where the illusion doesn't dissolve gracefully but shatters, jagged, sudden, with the specific violence of something that was under enormous pressure finally giving way. The part where reality doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like standing in a room where the walls have been removed, and the air is too much, too raw, coming from too many directions at once, and there is nowhere to turn that doesn't feel exposed. This is the fracture, not a metaphor. A lived experience with a texture and a duration and a particular quality of wrongness that the word awakening, with its soft, luminous connotations, is wholly inadequate to describe. You thought somewhere in the back of the mind that was beginning to see, that seeing would make things cleaner, that understanding the machinery would put you above it, that naming the conditioning would release you from the conditioning, the way naming something in a dream can sometimes dissolve it. This is the final illusion, and it is the most seductive one, precisely because it arrives dressed as wisdom. It presents itself as the natural conclusion of everything you've been learning, the reward at the end of the difficult journey of self-examination. See clearly, and the seeing itself will reorganize everything downstream of it. But that's not what happens. What happens is that you see clearly, and everything downstream of the seeing is still exactly where it was. The pattern still runs, the loop still complete. The emotional hijacking still occurs with the same authority it always had. Perhaps now with the additional cruelty of your awareness watching it happen, unable to intervene at the speed required, like someone watching a car accident in perfect slow motion with their hands locked at their sides. Knowledge does not equal change. Insight does not equal freedom. And the gap between the two is the fracture. The fracture has a specific phenomenology, a felt shape that recurs across different people in different contexts with remarkable consistency. There is first a period of exhilaration. The initial seeing produces what feels like altitude. You are above it. You can see the whole terrain. The patterns that were invisible are now visible, and visibility feels like mastery. And mastery feels like a kind of power that you did not have before. This period is real. Do not discount it, but do not trust it as a final state, because it is not. It is the euphoria of the ascent, and it does not account for what the air is like at altitude when the exhilaration fades and you realize you have no shelter. The second phase is quieter and harder and longer. The exhilaration drains. The patterns are still visible, but they are also still running, and the visibility does not stop them. It only makes you a more precise witness to your own captivity. The sense of altitude becomes the sense of exposure. And what was briefly panoramic becomes, without the warmth of the initial revelation, simply cold. This is where most people arrive and do not know what to do, because the literature of transformation did not prepare them for the plateau of the fracture, for the strange middle world between the old unconscious life and whatever comes after it, for the experience of being neither inside the system nor outside it, but caught at the threshold, one foot in each world, belonging fully to neither. Ordinary life becomes strange in this state, profoundly, disquietingly strange, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that would be visible to anyone watching. That the fracture is the result of finally, after years or decades refusing to do that automatically, and that the refusal, while necessary, has a cost that must be paid in the currency of the certainty it removed. And yet, and this is the thing that keeps the fracture from being simply tragedy, there is something that appears in the broken places that was not there before. Not immediately, not dramatically, but with the quiet insistence of something that grows in conditions the unbroken self could not provide. It appears in the spaces where the old certainties were, in the gaps left by the beliefs that have been examined and found inherited, in the strange open territory of a mind that no longer knows exactly who it is and has, after the exhaustion of fighting that not knowing begun, tentatively without flourish, to simply be in it. What appears there is not peace, not yet, but something adjacent to honesty, a quality of presence that is less defended and therefore, paradoxically, less afraid of what it encounters. The fracture removes the armor. That is painful. The armor was also a prison, which does not make losing it painless, but does make the loss eventually distinguishable from pure damage. You are different now than when this book began. Not in the ways that are easy to describe or demonstrate, not in ways anyone around you has necessarily noticed, but in the specific, private, unverifiable way that matters most, in the quality of attention you bring to your own interior. Something has been disrupted that will not reassemble in its original form. Something that was seamless now has a seam. Something that was solid now has a fault line running through it. The fault line is not damage. It is the place where the structure is no longer pretending to be more certain than it is. It is, in that specific sense, the most honest thing about you. And honesty, real honesty, the kind that costs something rather than the kind that simply confirms what was already believed, does not arrive as light. It arrives as fracture. It arrives exactly like this, exactly the way it already has. Chapter 11. Reclaiming the Mind. You cannot fight a system you are standing inside of, but you can stop obeying it. This is not the chapter where everything gets easier. Let that expectation go now cleanly. because carrying it will distort everything that follows. This is not the chapter where the hard work of the previous 10 delivers its reward in the form of relief or resolution, or the clean, bright sensation of a mind finally free. That version of this story is a product, packaged, priced, and sold by the same system you are trying to navigate away from. Real reclamation does not feel like arrival. It feels like the first time you stand in a familiar room and refuse, for a moment, to move in the direction you were going to move. Small, quiet, almost nothing, and yet completely different from everything that came before it. The difference is not dramatic. The difference is the direction of authority. For the first time, you are not obeying. You are observing. And the gap between those two things is where everything that matters actually lives. You have a voice in your head. You know the one. The continuous running, relentlessly productive commentary that narrates your experience, evaluates your performance, anticipates the future, revisits the past, tells you what people think of you, tells you what you think of yourself, delivers verdicts on your worth and capability with the confident authority of something that has never once been asked to provide its credentials. You have lived with this voice so long, and it has been so consistently present, that you have almost certainly made a fundamental error about it. Not consciously, not as a conclusion you arrived at through reasoning, just as the default assumption of a mind that has never been given cause to question it. You have assumed the voice is you, it isn't. And the moment you genuinely feel that, not understand it, feel it, is the moment the reclamation actually begins. Here is the distinction that changes everything, stated as plainly as it can be stated. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts arise. This has been said before, in various traditions, across various centuries, in various vocabularies, and it has been heard, processed, filed under interesting spiritual concept, and promptly forgotten by millions of people who returned immediately to identifying completely with the voice in their head. Because hearing the distinction is almost nothing. The hearing happens in the same mental space that the voice occupies. The voice can hear the concept, evaluate it, decide it is true or interesting, and then continue running exactly as before. Now occasionally producing the thought, I am not my thoughts, while remaining entirely in charge. The distinction only becomes real in the moment of actual observation, in the moment where you catch a thought arising. Not retrospectively, not after it has already run its course and produced its behavior, but in the emergence itself, and you are present to it as a phenomenon, rather than inside it as a fact. In that moment, something clarifies that no amount of conceptual understanding can produce. There is the thought, and there is the one noticing the thought, and they are not the same. That gap, that small, clear, absolutely revolutionary gap, that is where you actually are. The reclamation of the mind does not begin with grand restructuring. It does not begin with the overhaul of belief systems, or the dismantling of conditioning, or the wholesale reconstruction of identity. All of those things, attempted first, will fail, because all of those things require the mind to use itself as the primary tool for its own transformation, and a mind shaped by a system cannot fully reshape itself using only the resources the system provided. The leverage point is smaller and more radical than any of that. It is the simple, sustained, increasingly precise practice of watching what the mind does, without immediately doing it. A thought arises. I am not good enough for this. In the old configuration, the one that has been running your entire life, this thought is not experienced as a thought. It is experienced as a perception, as a fact about the world, specifically the world in which you are the subject. The difference between I am having the thought that I am not good enough and I am not good enough is invisible from inside the thought. But from the observer position, the difference is total. One is a weather event passing through. The other is the climate you live in. The reclamation is learning to recognize the weather, to say internally without drama, there is that thought again, not to fight it, not to replace it with a more flattering thought, not to analyze where it came from or what it means or whether it is true, just to see it. To let it be a thought rather than a verdict. This sounds simple, it is not, because the system you are reclaiming the mind from does not release its authority quietly. The moment you begin genuine observation, real watching, not the performed watching of someone who has read about mindfulness and is going through the motions, the system responds, not with a dramatic confrontation, With escalation, the thoughts get louder, more urgent, more compelling, more laden with the specific emotional charge that has always been sufficient to pull you back inside them. The "I am not good enough" thought arrives with more force than usual, dressed in more specific evidence, accompanied by the particular quality of dread that has always made it impossible to simply watch. It demands engagement. It insists on being responded to rather than observed. It presents itself as too important to be treated as mere weather. This is not coincidence. This is the system's immune response, the same mechanism that protected the conditioning from examination, described in earlier chapters, now protects the thought stream from being observed rather than obeyed. Because a thought that is genuinely observed rather than obeyed loses power, and the system that runs on thought as command cannot afford to lose power to something as quiet and unassuming as simple watching. The escalation is the proof that the watching is working. There is a specific quality of presence that develops through sustained observation that cannot be manufactured by intention alone. It grows, slowly, almost imperceptibly, over the accumulation of moments in which you chose, again, to notice rather than react, to see rather than become. It does not feel like strength initially. It feels more like distance, a strange, unfamiliar spaciousness in the interior, as if the room the mind lives in has become slightly larger than it was before. The thoughts still arrive, all of them. The self-criticism, the anxiety, the loops, the inherited verdicts, the scripted responses. None of that content changes quickly, or perhaps ever completely, but the relationship to it changes. The authority it carries diminishes, not dramatically, not permanently, not without the constant maintenance of actual practice, but enough to introduce, in more and more moments, the small but total revolution of a pause. The pause is everything. Everything that has ever been called freedom in the context of the human mind. Every tradition, every practice, every genuinely transformative insight lives inside that pause. The pause between stimulus and response, between thought and action, between the voice delivering its verdict and you accepting it without question. The pause is not dramatic. It is not the lightning bolt reorganization of the self. It is a breath, a moment of notice, a fraction of a second in which you are the observer rather than the observed, the watcher rather than the watched, something slightly separate from the machinery rather than completely merged with it. That fraction of a second is what reclamation actually looks like. This is what it means to take back the mind, not in a single decisive act, but in the sustained, unglamorous, daily practice of creating that pause, protecting it, and returning to it every time the system swallows it again. And the system will swallow it, constantly, repeatedly, without apology. Here is the thing about reclaiming the mind that makes it different from every other project you have ever undertaken. In every other project, progress is measured by accumulation. More knowledge, more skill, more capacity, more evidence of advancement. The reclamation of the mind is measured differently. It is measured by subtraction, by the progressive removal of what was falsely added, by the gradual quieting of what was artificially amplified, by the increasing ability to sit in the presence of your own consciousness without being immediately swept up into its content. This does not feel like gain. It feels like less noise eventually, less urgent, less of the breathless, relentless forward momentum of a mind that has been running on system fuel its entire life. That less is not emptiness, but it will feel like emptiness. At first, because your entire frame of reference for what the interior should feel like was built by a system that required constant stimulation, constant narrative, constant self-referential momentum to maintain its hold. Quiet to that system is malfunction. Stillness is a problem to be solved. Presence without agenda is a vacuum to be filled. You will need to learn to tolerate the quiet, to recognize it not as absence but as ground, the actual ground, the one that was always there beneath the noise, that the noise was always covering. The mind you are reclaiming is not the one you lost. You did not lose a mind. You inherited a mind, fully pre-furnished, and lived in it without examining what was actually yours. What you are reclaiming is not a previous state but a capacity, a faculty for genuine observation that was always present, always available, perpetually submerged beneath the authority of the system that needed you operational and predictable and unconsciously obedient. It is still there. It has always been there. It was there in every moment you almost caught the pattern. Every flicker of the observer in the half-second before the loop closed. Every time something in you watched for just a moment, and the watching felt briefly, unmistakably like the most real thing that had ever happened. That capacity is not something you build. It is something you uncover. And the uncovering is not a single act of excavation, but the long, patient, repeated practice of choosing, again and again and again, to be the one who watches rather than the one who is simply run. The system does not end when you start watching, but something changes that matters more than its ending. For the first time in your life, you are watching it run, and what watches cannot be fully controlled by what it watches. That small, quiet, radical fact is where the reclamation actually begins, not before, not elsewhere, here, in the watching, right now. Chapter 12. The Dangerous Freedom. Freedom is not what you thought it was, and the version you have been moving toward, the one this book has been slowly, inevitably walking you to, is going to cost you things you did not budget for. Not comfort. You already knew comfort was part of the price. Not certainty. You have already felt certainty loosening its grip. What this freedom costs, what true awareness actually extracts from a life, is something more intimate than either of those. It costs the easy company of people who have not been where you have been. It costs the frictionless participation in a world that runs on the very illusions you can no longer fully inhabit. It costs the simple animal pleasure of being completely inside your experience without the observer watching from the edge. And it costs something that has no clean name, a kind of innocence. Not the innocence of ignorance, but the innocence of total belonging, of being fully of the world rather than partially estranged from it. This is the dangerous freedom. Not dangerous because it harms you. Dangerous because it marks you. And the marked cannot move through the world the way the unmarked do. You have changed. The changing happened gradually, then suddenly, then gradually again, the way all real changes happen. Not as events, but as weather systems, moving through so slowly you almost miss them, until one day the landscape is different and you cannot locate the moment it shifted. The person who opened this book and the person reading this final chapter share a name, a face, a history. But something has been displaced, some foundational assumption about the nature of the self, the origin of thought, the architecture of the world you move through. Something that was load-bearing has been removed and has not been replaced with anything equally solid. This is not a failure of the process, it is the process. The solidity that was there before was false solidity, the confident weight of things that had never been tested. What replaces it is something thinner and stranger and ultimately more honest, the ability to function without the false floor. To stand on ground you know is uncertain and remain standing, not because you have found bedrock, but because you have stopped requiring it. That is harder than it sounds. It is harder than anything the previous version of you was asked to do, and it is also in ways that will only become fully visible in retrospect, more worth doing. Here is what the dangerous freedom actually feels like from inside the living of it. It feels like permanent translation, like being someone who learned a second language so thoroughly that they now dream in it, but who can never entirely forget that it is a second language, can never lose the slight doubleness of a mind that operates in two registers simultaneously. You are present in your life and aware of its construction at the same time. You participate in conversations and hear their architecture. You move through systems and feel their design. You experience emotions and observe their triggers. You are here. And you are also always slightly watching here from a position that is not quite inside it. This doubleness is not chosen. After a certain depth of awareness, it simply is, and it produces a specific kind of exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of too much activity, but the exhaustion of too much consciousness, of a mind that cannot fully rest inside any experience, because part of it never stops watching the experience happen. The unmarked world around you does not know this exhaustion, cannot know it, and you cannot explain it in a way that does not sound. To ears that haven't heard what you've heard, like a problem with you rather than a consequence of seeing. There may already be, relationships that the freedom strains. Not all of them, and not necessarily the deepest ones, but some. The ones that were built entirely on shared assumptions that you no longer share. the ones that relied on a version of you that was legible within a framework you have now partially exited. The person who needed you to be certain in the ways you were certain, to believe what you believed, to perform the identity that organized your relationship with them. That person will feel, before they can name it, that something has shifted, and they will pull toward the previous configuration, instinctively, the way everyone pulls toward the known version of a person they have learned to navigate. You will feel the pull. You will sometimes comply, because love is real, and belonging is real, and the desire to be fully received by another person is one of the most human things there is. But you will also notice, in the complying, the specific cost of becoming again what you are no longer, the faint exhaustion of performing a self that has been outgrown. Like wearing clothes that technically still fit, but have lost the capacity to feel like yours. This is one of the loneliest features of the dangerous freedom. Not that it removes connection. It doesn't necessarily, not permanently, not in all directions. But it changes the conditions under which genuine connection is possible. You need something different now. Something that most people are not equipped to offer, not because they are less than you. That interpretation is precisely the trap. The ego's way of converting the loneliness of awareness into the superiority of awareness, which is one of the most seductive and ultimately most isolating misreadings of this territory, simply because they are elsewhere. And you are here, and here is for now a relatively unpopulated place. The dangerous freedom carries a specific temptation that must be named because it will visit you, if it is not already. The temptation to make the awareness an identity, to organize the self around the seeing, to become, in other words, someone who has woken up, with all the quiet or not, so quiet superiority that construction implies. The spiritual ego is more sophisticated than the ordinary ego, and more difficult to detect, because it wears the language of transcendence. It says the right things, it performs the right humility, but underneath the performance is the same ancient machinery. The need to be special, to be advanced, to have something others don't, to convert even the dismantling of the self into a new and better self to be proud of. This temptation is the system's final and most elegant move. Having failed to keep you entirely unconscious, it offers you a consolation prize, consciousness as status, awareness as achievement, the freedom repackaged as an identity to protect, a position to defend, a new version of the cage built from the materials of the escape. Watch for it is subtle. It feels like integrity. It is the system, still running, still finding purchase, still doing what it has always done, converting every movement away from it into a new form of dependence on true freedom, the version on the far side of the dangerous freedom, the one that a small number of people actually reach and fewer still maintain, does not feel like having something others lack. It feels like having less that is false. That is a distinction with enormous practical consequences. Because having less that is false is not a position of elevation. It is a position of increasing porosity, increasing availability to experience, increasing capacity to be genuinely present without the constant mediation of the constructed self. It is quieter than the identity-based awareness, less certain of itself, more willing to be wrong, more capable of being moved by ordinary things, because the extraordinary is no longer being performed, and the ordinary has stopped being filtered through the need to be more than ordinary. This is the other side of the dangerous freedom that does not get described enough. The not peaceful, not triumphant, not elevated side is real and should be named. But so is this, the return of a certain quality of aliveness that the system had been quietly taxing for years, a perceptual freshness, the specific pleasure of encountering your own experience without the constant mediation of the voice that was always evaluating, judging, positioning, comparing, and managing. Moments that land fully because there is slightly less between you and the moment. Connections that carry their actual weight, because you are slightly more present to receive them. These moments are not permanent. They do not constitute a new stable state. But they are real, and they are the evidence. Not the proof, the evidence, that what has been undergone was not purely cost. You are going to carry this now. Carry is the right word, not wear, not display, not build an identity around. Carry, the way you carry anything that changed you and cannot be put down, not as burden only, though sometimes as burden, but also as the specific gravity of something that has become part of your actual weight in the world. The awareness will deepen or it will be suppressed, but it will not disappear. The questions will compound or they will be silenced, but they will not be unasked. The fracture in the old certainty will widen or be papered over, but the paper will always know what is underneath it. You have seen what you have seen. The seeing is yours now. The world has not changed. This is perhaps the most bracing reality of the dangerous freedom, that the systems continue, the conditioning continues, the architecture of influence continues its precise and patient work on every human mind that moves through it, including yours, including now, including after everything this book has described. The seeing does not stop the world. The awareness does not dismantle the machine. The fracture and the reclamation, and the hard-won observer position, do not exempt you from being human, which means being susceptible, which means being worked on, which means the work of watching never ends and the maintenance of the gap, that small, crucial. Everything, gap between thought and obedience, is not a project with a completion date. This is your life now, not a problem to be solved, a practice to be sustained. In full knowledge of how difficult the sustaining is, how often the gap will close, how reliably the system will reclaim whatever ground the watching temporarily opened. You will lose the gap repeatedly. You will be inside the pattern before you notice the pattern beginning. You will obey the thought before you remembered you were supposed to watch it. You will perform the loop, complete the script, feel the emotion exactly on cue, and only afterward in the particular clarity that sometimes follows automatic behavior. Recognize what just happened, and then you will return to the watching. Not because it is easy, not because the return feels triumphant, but because you have been to the place where the watching lives, and you know, now that it is there, that it was always there, that it is the most real thing about you. More real than the content of any thought, more real than the identity assembled from the thoughts, more real than the system that generated the identity and the thoughts, and the very doubts you are having right now about whether any of this is possible. The watching is possible. You are doing it. That, exactly that, only that. Nothing more dramatic or certain or resolved than that is the dangerous freedom, and it is yours. Completely, irrevocably, costingly, beautifully yours for the first time. By now, something inside you has shifted. Maybe it's subtle, maybe it's uncomfortable, maybe it's terrifying, but it's there, a crack in the illusion. Because once you see how the system operates, you start noticing it everywhere. In conversations, in decisions, in the quiet moments where a thought appears, and you hesitate, just for a second, wondering, did I choose that, or was it chosen for me? Most people will never ask that question. Not because they can't, but because they're afraid of the answer. Because seeing the system comes with a cost. You lose certainty, you lose comfort, you lose the easy illusion of control, but what you gain is something far more dangerous. Awareness, and awareness changes everything. Ignore this and you go back to sleep, back into patterns, loops, reactions that feel safe but aren't yours. But if you lean into it, if you keep questioning, observing, resisting the automatic, you begin to take something back, piece by piece, thought by thought, choice by choice. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to matter. This isn't the end of the journey. It's the point where it actually begins. So if something in this made you pause, think, question, stay with it, follow deeper, because the system never stops evolving, and neither should you. If you're ready to go further into this world, into the patterns people refuse to see, then stay connected. Follow, engage, share what others are too afraid to say out loud. Because the moment you start seeing clearly, you realize something else. You're not the only one waking up.